Welcome to this edition of Pennsylvania Newsmakers. I'm your host, Gene Barr, for this week's show. Well, today we're going to talk to a couple people who do some very critical work on behalf of students, children, and families. And we're going to do that right after these messages.
Welcome to the fast-paced and unrehearsed weekly discussion featuring the leaders who help shape your world. Join us as we address the issues that impact you each and every day. This is Pennsylvania Newsmakers. And now, here's your host.
Welcome back to Pennsylvania Newsmakers. My first guest today is Natalie Nutt. Natalie is Executive Director of the Bridge Educational Foundation. Natalie, thanks for being with us today.
Thanks for having me on.
Greatly appreciate you coming on. So, what is Bridge?
So Bridge is a 501c3 nonprofit, and we work through the Educational Improvement Tax Credit, or EITC for short, program in Pennsylvania. We help out families from pre-K, students from pre-K through grade 12 in 61 of Pennsylvania's 67 counties.
Okay, so you've got 6 more to work on, and we're still
six
plugging
more.
away on
A few
that.
of those don't have non-public schools, so.
Oh, interesting. And I should do a disclaimer. I'm also on the board of Bridge, but they do, in my view, critical work, and I was very excited to have you guys on. So let's talk a little bit more about when did the organization start?
So our organization was founded in 2005, just a few years after the EITC program was created in 2001. In fact, it was the last piece of legislation then Governor Tom Ridge signed before he became the nation's first Homeland Security Director.
Okay. So why did it come into place? You have this, which we're going to talk a little bit more in detail about, the Education Improvement Tax Credit, as well as a couple of the other programs that have developed subsequently. Why did Bridge come into existence as a result of that program?
So we had a wonderful board who saw an opportunity for their business colleagues to participate in this public-private partnership. The program was created as a way for businesses to help their future workforces by providing scholarships. And so our board of directors thought they had a number of contacts that would benefit from participating and giving back to the communities where they live and work. And so they got together and said, let's form this foundation and really gear up through the EITC program and get as many businesses as possible involved to help as many kids across the state as possible.
Okay, so explain a little more. The Education Improvement Tax Credit, as you mentioned, former Governor Ridge instituted this. Is it fair to say this is part of we haven't had this discussion on the show a number of times, the whole school choice issue? Does it factor into that discussion at all, giving parents and students, children, a chance and a choice for their education?
Absolutely. So these scholarships benefit parents who are looking for their child's best educational option. So in this case, through Bridge, that's a tuition-based school. The EITC program is really unique in that it benefits the public schools as well. So there is a component to the EITC program that benefits public school kids. For instance, Junior Achievement participates in the EITC program, and my own public school kids participated in JA in elementary school, which was an amazing program. So that's what's really unique about the EITC is it benefits all Pennsylvania students. Okay.
The breakdown, is it mainly parochial private schools, or what's... Obviously, there's some from the public side, and I know that there's some other nonprofits who take advantage, museums, et cetera, also take advantage of this.
That's correct, and they do it through the EIO program. So the EITC program has a number of components. There's a pre-kindergarten component, there's a K through 12 component, and both of those are scholarship-based. So those go to income-qualified families who are choosing a tuition-based school for their children. And then there is the EIO, the Educational Improvement Organization component, which is what you mentioned, the museums, the Pittsburgh Symphony, Junior Achievement, and those entities benefit unique public school programs. And then there is the more recent addition, the OSTC program. And that's the Opportunity Scholarship Tax Credit Program. And that's very similar to the EITC program, but it targets children who are residing in the lowest performing public school districts, and is specific to the actual public school. So they live within the attendance boundaries of the lowest performing public schools.
Okay, all right. So I do want to get into a lot of those, in detail, the EITC and the OSTC. Before we jump into that, why don't we take a break and we'll come right back and talk more in detail about that. We'll be back after these messages.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry, the statewide voice of business, and by the Pennsylvania State Education Association, bringing the power of a great education to our schools, our students, and our communities. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Highway Information Association, the go-to source to learn about transportation projects and issues. Please visit pahighwayinfo.org. And by the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. Business in Pennsylvania is our business.
Welcome back to Pennsylvania Newsmakers. My guest here is Natalie Nutt, who's the Executive Director of Bridge Educational Foundation. So Natalie, we're talking before we left about the various components of these programs, EITC, the OSTC, the EIO, lots of letters and floating around out there, and acronyms are great in government. What do businesses get out of participating in the EITC? And that's a critical part of the program, and I know that's a big attraction for them.
Oh, yeah, it's wonderful. So they receive a tax credit. And for the pre-K program, for the first $10,000, it's a 100% tax credit. And then for the other programs, it is a 75% tax credit up to $750,000 for each entity. And for a 2-year commitment, they get a 90% tax credit, again, up to $750,000 for each tax year.
And you said the EITC is regardless, and OSTC is more targeted specifically to those districts that have historically, we'll say, underperformed standards, correct?
That's correct.
And are the parameters still the same for the OSTC?
The OSTC, the schools change every year. So the PDE puts out a list each year of the lowest performing public schools. So when we're giving out scholarships, we have to refer back to that list to make sure that the students are residing in the attendance boundaries of those lowest performing public schools before we give them an OSTC scholarship. The EITC scholarships can go to any income qualified family that is paying tuition in the state of Pennsylvania.
And I have to say also as well that my high school where I went has gone out of business a number of years ago, and it's in an area that has some of those challenges too, and Bridge has been tremendously helpful to getting opportunities for children down in that area too. So I thank Bridge for doing that. There's also something called a special purpose entity, correct?
Oh, correct, yes.
Let's talk a little bit about that. People may not be as familiar with that.
So the special purpose entities have taken advantage of the EITC program by grouping together high-income individuals who form an entity to claim the tax credits for individual use. So they form a special purpose entity, claim the tax credits, and then pass those tax credits through to those individuals who are part of that, basically a shell corporation.
Okay. Now, I know this program has grown significantly over the years, and the legislature continues to put more to it, I think because they see the results of this. And as we said, school choice is something on the minds of many of them. So there has been tremendous growth in this program, correct?
Oh, that's correct. Yes, it's grown exponentially since it was started in 2001. And I think a lot of that is because there has been so many businesses that want to participate. So the tax credits sell out every year. They're available July 1st each new state fiscal year and are usually gone within that first business day.
How much has Bridge distributed since they've come into existence?
$56 million.
$56 million has gone to children and their families in order to help this. Do you do anything with the charter schools, cyber schools? Do they come into it at all?
We don't, but we get that question a lot. So because the charter schools are based through the public school model, they're not eligible for the scholarships. The charter schools might be able to take advantage of the EIO programs like the Junior Achievements or the Pittsburgh Symphony type programs. I'm sure that they would be able to go into the charter schools and provide those unique programs.
How many businesses participate in this program?
Thousands. So I'd have to check with DCED. I think the last count was over 40,000 businesses had participated in the EITC program.
Great. And I know you'd love to have more participation.
Yes,
so
absolutely.
How can people find out more about Bridge and EITC, OSTC, all the acronyms?
Well, we have a lot of information on our website, which is bridgeedu.org. We've got business information on there. We've got information how schools can get our scholarships and how parents can participate. And they can also check out DCED, the state website. If you go to newpa.com and Google or search EITC, all the information will come up there as well.
Perfect. Thank you for being with us today.
Thank
Great
you
to
for
hear about
having
the
me.
program. Hope to have you back again soon. We'll be back after these messages. Thanks.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by Cross-State Credit Union Association. Credit unions, where people are worth more than money. To find a credit union that is right for you, go to ibelong.org. And by the Energy Association of Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania's energy information source. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Association of Pennsylvania State College and University Faculties, representing the faculty and coaches who are devoted to providing quality public higher education for Pennsylvania's college students.
Welcome back to Pennsylvania Newsmakers. My next guest is Andrea Heberlein, who's Executive Director of the Early Learning Investment Commission. Andrea, thanks for coming on.
Absolutely.
Tell us what the ELIC is. We're talking a lot about acronyms on the show today, so there's another one.
Yes, the Pennsylvania Early Learning Investment Commission. Quite simply, we are a commission of senior-level business leaders who are appointed by the governor to advance quality early learning throughout the Commonwealth.
Okay. And when was that created, the ELIC, the commission itself?
We were officially created in 2008 under Governor Rendell's administration, but I will say Governor Ridge and Schweiker spent an awful lot of time digging into this issue through research and reports and a Pennsylvania study that really showed how critically important early childhood education is across a variety of outcomes, but specifically looking at economic outcomes. And so this led to the creation of the Early Learning Investment Commission that I will say was reauthorized under the Corbett administration, the Wolf administration, and then most recently under the Shapiro-Davis administration.
And you've been at the commission for how long now?
Since 2019.
2019. So
Yes.
you've gotten a few years into there.
Absolutely.
So I want to dig a little bit more into this. You've talked about these benefits, and there have been studies. And so what have the benefits shown of early learning?
Oh my goodness. It really does span so many outcomes. We can think about quality childcare as being a primary delivery mechanism for early learning. And so when we think about birth to 5, that is a period of time in which brain development is basically on fire. This is where the foundation of the brain is being developed. It's really being formed. And so when we have early learning that's delivered through quality childcare, we have an opportunity to surround young children with developmentally appropriate learning activities, social emotional skills, and really that engaged, caring adult that is going to help produce those outcomes that are so essential for the K through 12 system. At the same time, because quality early learning is most often delivered through childcare, you have the benefit of families, working families, who have a place where their child is receiving quality care, quality early learning, so that they can fully participate in the workforce. And honestly, Gene, we have so many impact studies that show that there is a significant return on investment when we do invest in our earliest learners.
So before we cut the break here in about a minute or so, you've used the term quality child care. How do you define quality child care? I know you have something called STARS.
That's
just
right.
Talk quickly about that. So
That's right.
It's not just we're throwing a term around. There is a definition for that.
Yes, and I just want to underscore that so often we hear that children need early learning so they can be ready to learn. Children are born learning. And so when we have quality childcare, we have early childhood educators that are skilled in understanding what those developmentally appropriate activities are. I think there would be a lot of people who would be surprised to know that in Pennsylvania, we have infant and toddler early learning standards that are aligned with pre-K early learning standards that are aligned with our K through 12 system. So we know that there is intentional learning that is surrounding young children in quality child care centers.
When we come back, I want to talk a little bit about the fact this goes beyond education and becomes a workforce issue.
Absolutely.
So we're going to talk about that when we come back. We'll do that after these messages.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Medical Society. Inspired physicians committed to the good health of Pennsylvanians and the advancement of the practice of medicine. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by Pennsylvania American Water. We keep life flowing across the Keystone State.
Welcome back to Pennsylvania Newsmakers. My guest here is Andrea Heberlein, who's Executive Director of the Early Learning Investment Commission. Now, before we broke, we're talking a bit about the educational sides of this. That is how critical these efforts are for children starting out. But I think in recent years, there's been some additional evidence for this. And I know one of the things that we looked at during my previous career was how do we increase our workforce? And we identified barriers into things like transportation issues getting people there. There are criminal justice issues, people that have had a past 10 years ago and are prohibited from getting off the sidelines and working. And another one, a really critical one, is the lack of child care. In fact, there was a term coined called child care deserts that was coined by somebody at the national level. Pennsylvania has some of these, but you would agree, obviously, that this is really a workforce issue, that we've got parents who can't get off the sidelines, as we say, who would love to go in and work, but can't because they live in one of these deserts that don't have the wherewithal to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. And really, Gene, across Pennsylvania, we are in a child care crisis. We have insufficient child care to meet the demand of parents who need affordable, quality child care. And you're absolutely right. It translates into significant economic loss for Pennsylvania. We'd had a study that was conducted several years ago in which we were able to calculate a $6.5 billion economic impact annually as a result of insufficient child care. And
is that the U.S. Chamber study that was done? Yeah.
Absolutely. And that was reflected in the cost to families, certainly, like you mentioned, not being able to fully participate in the workforce, employers in costs related to recruitment, retention, turnover, absenteeism, presenteeism, and ultimately to tax revenue, which affects Pennsylvania's economy dramatically.
And I know from, again, talking to business owners over the years, I can't think of a single business owner who said, I've got more than enough employees. They're desperate for employees. And one thing that I always heard was, the toughest thing is attracting and retaining quality employees, and part of that is what you talk about here.
Absolutely, and I think it's really important for me to underscore that as much as our private sector businesses are really struggling to find the sufficient amount of qualified applicants, we are also struggling in the early childhood sector. Unfortunately, childcare is a market failure. It is just really a flawed business model that never worked. And so as a result, it costs more to provide than parents can afford to pay. And how that translates is into very low wages for our early childhood educators. And like we talked about in the earlier segment, this is the most consequential period of brain development for children. And so when we don't have those quality options for children, not only are we impacting today's workforce, but we're also affecting the workforce pipeline.
Yes, absolutely. And you've hit on what is really one of the dilemmas here, which is we don't pay these workers all that much because the model just doesn't work. And if we say, well, we're going to pay them more to retain them, that means you've got to charge more to people who have a hard time in terms of affording it, correct? Because
Exactly right.
It's expensive providing quality child care, as you've talked about.
Absolutely, absolutely. And you know, we are in Pennsylvania bound by child-adult ratio, which is incredibly important. So you can't,
Yes.
you know, raise the amount of children to be able to increase your profit margin. You are just ultimately running on a very slim margin and oftentimes in the red.
Correct.
Currently, Gene, in Pennsylvania, we have 3,000 job openings for ECE educators, which is probably on a small side of the estimate, which is 24,000 children who are not able to receive care. So we really do need to think about how public and private and philanthropic efforts can help bridge this gap so that we can help families, we can help children, employees, and ultimately our economy.
Are there parts of Pennsylvania that are more affected than others, or say more of a desert than other places? Is that a fair statement?
Absolutely, but I would say that child care prices are untenable for families across the income spectrum. But certainly we have child care deserts in our rural communities. And it is really fascinating because when you think about the traditional child care model of having a center perhaps of 100 or 125 children, that's not practical in rural PA. So there's a lot of creative solutions that are centering around home-based childcare providers, which can be a really quality option. It can be affordable. It can be really close geographically to where families live and where their workplace are. So there are definitely great examples of innovation that are happening across Pennsylvania, and we have a really important I think, obligation to expand the scope and scale of things that we know that are working.
Why don't you talk about some of those innovative programs? And again,
sure.
the other thing to throw in, which compounds the problem, is you've got shift workers.
Absolutely.
It's not always an 8 to 4 deal, but there are some innovations going on. Who's
my
doing
goodness.
some interesting
things? And you know
things?
what? I will say that I know we're going to talk about investments in Caring PA, but there are some great examples of some case studies I think that your viewers would really enjoy hearing. You mentioned shift work. I think one of the most innovative models out in the western part of the state is with the Pittsburgh Housing Authority. They have on one of their apartment complexes on the first floor a high-quality 24-hour child care center. And so you are really looking at this as meeting families where they are. So if you are looking for a job and you need, to have, learned your resume, interviews, your child has a place in which you can do drop-in care, and then when you find a job, chances are it's not the 9 to 5. So you have this ability to really wrap these services around children and families.
We've got about 30 seconds, so why don't you tell people, our viewers, how they can find out more information about all these things we've talked about here today.
Well, and especially for the employers that are tuning in today, I would really suggest going to Investments in Caring PA because it is a resource that's specifically designed for Pennsylvania's employers.
Excellent. Very good. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks for being with us here today. Thank you for joining us here on PA Newsmakers. Look forward to seeing you next week. Thanks.